At Juilliard, I was teaching playwriting and feeling very frustrated about how hard it is to teach someone. And I was in the elevator and it said master class with Leontyne Price, 4 p.m. And I looked and it was 3:59. I said, oh, that'll cheer me up or take my mind off things. And as soon as she walked out, I thought, this is so theatrical. Here's one of the great divas of my lifetime, you know, teaching, saying this is not about me. And of course, we're more interested in Leontyne Price and the student. I said, this is such a theatrical setting. And then another 2 or 3 years later, I was at an event where actors were doing different scenes from my plays. And Nathan Lane did a speech from Lisbon Traviata, and Zoe Caldwell came out and did a scene from A Perfect Ganesh. And just like that, I said, Masterclass, Maria Callas. I wrote the first line of the play on my program, no applause, and I wrote the last line, well, that's that. Then I thought, all I have to do now is fill it in for 2.5 hours in between.
We're talking about an artist of the caliber of the greatest artists ever, like Michelangelo or Nijinsky or people like that, which the more they lived and the more they added, they conquered.
She was the queen of opera, but the thing she wanted was to be the queen of jet society.
Most sopranos can make you cry in the last act of Traviata, but she made you cry in the second act.
When we say Maria Callas, we think always on the artist, on the singer, on the interpret, and the actress, everything that you want. But the question is, who was Maria Callas, the woman, Maria Callas? Who knows this? I don't know.
In 1958, Madame Callas was interviewed by Edward R. Murrow at her suite at the Waldorf in New York.
Madame Callas, much has been said and written about your temperament. What do you have to say? Are you really temperamental?
What do you mean by temperamental, Mr. Murrow? I quite haven't understood.
Well, I suppose tantrums, throwing things, screaming.
Dear. I have never thrown anything at anyone, though sometimes you feel like it. No, tantrums. It's not even true. It's just certain situations that turn up, you know nothing about it, and you just react as any normal human being.
But Callas was not just any normal human being. In that same year, 1958, she walked out on the Rome Opera, was barred from appearing at La Scala in Milan, broke up with her husband, began an affair with Aristotle Onassis, and was fired from New York's Metropolitan Opera by its director, Rudolph Bing.
Anger, if you don't get angry sometimes, even not really, essentially, you never obtain the results. During performances, if I really didn't get angry, and they were not afraid, the other people would not work more than the necessary.
You mean they're afraid of you?
Afraid? Yeah, yes.
Afraid of what?
I would have to sort of whip them with my angers. If you don't whip them into working twice as hard, either morally or by your, shall we say, tantrum, which is also sometimes false, they would never be able to come at that date, shall we say, 3-4 days, as I prepared operas in 3 or 4 days. If I didn't really start screaming and yelling, you wouldn't have the result. We would not have gone on stage.
You've said, I need to be constantly boosted because I am a born pessimist.
That is true.
Really?
That is true.
And you need somebody always puffing you up?
Yes, because the weapon that is against me is exactly that.
Huh.
Whatever I do is never good enough.
A perfectionist.
Perfectionist, unfortunate.
And perfectionists are miserable to live with.
Mm-hmm. That is true. Well, for instance, my husband, he wanted so much that I be La Divina. For instance, he was taking things out on people, as he was nothing special.
If your husband was nothing special, why did you marry him in the first place?
He was a good person, I thought. And if you have as my home family was not, with my mother, I was not well off, and I was alone, and I felt that this person really loved me. But I'm afraid that he loved what I represented. It was a very unfortunate episode of my life that I prefer not to discuss.
Onassis didn't keep you from being a normal human being.
And then with Mr. Onassis, we had a wonderful life. I don't regret every bit of it. I do regret when I stopped singing.
You stopped singing because of
Well,
him?
no, I worked less and less because evidently he did not like me to sing.
Scorpios, the tiny island that shot into the headlines when Jackie Kennedy, America's former First Lady, became the second Mrs. Aristotle Onassis.
Maria became a recluse in her flat in Avenue Georges Mandel. Numerous attempts were made to interest her in restarting her career. A proposed recording of La Traviata, to be conducted by Giulini, with either Pavarotti or Domingo playing Alfredo, was abandoned at the last minute when she lost her nerve. She made a film of Medea with the Italian director Pasolini, but it was not a success commercially. She gave master classes at the Juilliard School in New York, here teaching the tenor role in Tosca.
Only the first two phrases are, you know, sort of like a recitative, but not exactly. So you should not give it that much importance.
Yeah.
In other words, you spare yourself if you...
Do you know what I think? I think you're still in love with Onassis.
Well, I think in some way both of us are probably in love because we have led a beautiful life together, and I think both of us understand each other as nobody. But at a certain stage, love becomes different.
For the world of opera, her place in history is a kind of total commitment to opera as a serious art form that can enrich our lives, shed some meaning on the human condition, and it's not just an art form for rich people sung by fat sopranos and half the audience is sound asleep. She made opera, I think, theater. She made it matter. I think she brought opera very much into the modern era, and she's a genius that way. She also had a genius, it seems, for publicity. The press was always fascinated by her. It was always a great story. Early in her career, she married a much older man who nurtured her and helped her. She didn't have to take menial jobs. She made her debut in a leading part. Many famous singers start in small parts and work their way up to singing Tosca. She was always Tosca or Aida or Norma. And then she went on a very famous diet. And she was never enormous, but she was a solid linebacker type soprano. And suddenly she looked like Audrey Hepburn. Then the love affairs with, when she left her husband for Aristotle Onassis, and then his great betrayal. And all of this is the fodder for Daily News. So when she was finally fired at the Met, I remember very well, the Daily News headline says, "Bing fires Callas." And you couldn't say Gelb fires Voight and people would know what you're talking about, but everyone in New York knew what Bing fires Callas meant, those three words. And unfortunately, she's become more famous to many people for her offstage life than her actual career, which was relatively brief as singers go. Joan Sutherland was singing well into her 60s. Maria Callas stopped singing in her 40s effectively. There was an occasional series, 4 performances here, 2 years off, 3 performances of Tosca. And then the last 4 or 5 years of her life, she didn't sing at all, though she was always in the news. Whenever she went out in the evening, she was photographed. But I think people who see this play, who are intrigued by her, and I think it's hard not to be intrigued by the personality, can certainly go and buy her recordings, all of which are still available. There's not a single one of her recordings that is out of print. And as I have her say in the play, because I believe it, it's all there in the recordings. She says to the audience, it doesn't matter if I sing or not, because at this point in the master classes, when she gave them historically at Juilliard, would she come out of retirement or not? Because it's a fact that singers can go through bad vocal periods, restudy, retrain, re-examine their techniques, and reemerge triumphantly. That did not happen with her. There is truth, validation to the fact that she went to Juilliard while she was giving the master classes and worked several hours a day with a vocal coach, and the voice just never really returned to its former glory. And then the last time she sang in New York, she gave a joint recital with Giuseppe Di Stefano, a tenor with whom she made most of her recordings, and both singers were well past their prime, and they were sold out, but the critics were very harsh, and I think the audiences were very disappointed. What was left was not the voice I remember hearing as a 12, 13-year-old living in Corpus Christi, Texas. We could get the opera broadcast from Mexico City relayed through Monterrey, Mexico, and I heard this incredible voice on the radio, and she was known then as Maria Meneghini Callas because her husband was Meneghini, and she had all three names, which is very European for a soprano to put her husband's name in the middle, and then Maria Meneghini Callas, and I fell in love with his voice. And then suddenly she became famous, and she was on the cover of Time magazine, and she became, so I'd say it's about 16 years she really had an active career. I'd say 14 of them were in full fame of the world. Everyone knew who she was. It was very meteor. It was like a Jimmy Dean of opera. I mean, very big flame, and very swift extinction of that flame.
One last question. On the occasion of this comeback tour of yours, one critic in Germany wrote that the world tour might turn out to be a grandiose finale, or it could turn out to be an artistic tragedy.
So far, it hasn't been a tragedy.
And you don't?
I belong to the category, the difference between the ancient Greeks and me is that I don't cry on tragedies until they happen. If they happen, then I don't cry on the tragedies. I cope with them. So let's hope for the best.
But hoping for the best could not ensure that final comeback for Maria Callas. Here at London's Festival Hall, one critic called her performance one of the saddest evenings he ever had to spend. To be honest, he wrote, her voice, a shade of what was, could not begin to answer the demands she and the music made on it. Alone, she went back to that apartment in Paris and spent her days listening to her old recordings. On the 16th of September, 1977, 4 years after that interview with Mike Wallace, she collapsed and died of a heart attack. Maria Callas was 53.